Hey guys, it's David from Gigi's Fabric Shop, Juki Junkies, and Junkies, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about how to use industrial sewing thread on a Juki TL, one of our favorites. So we get asked, can I use industrial thread on a Juki TL all the time? And the answer is yes. You can use all the way up to a Tech 70 as the max capacity on a Juki TL. We recommend not using your cutter when using industrial thread because it's gonna dull out that blade over time and you don't want a dull cutter. So it's just easier to just press that needle up button, pull your fabric out and snip it. But let's jump into how you can get your stitches to look super crisp and beautiful, just like this sample piece right here using Tech 70 on a Juki TL. So there's a few steps that we're gonna follow to achieve the perfect stitch quality using industrial thread. Step number one is going to be how to wind your bobbin. It's crucial that you wind the bobbin nice and tight so you have perfect stitch quality in your sewing process. The next step is going to be how to thread your machine. It's a little bit different since we're using a heavier weight thread. And the next step is going to be what needle size and if you can use your needle threader. Then the final step is going to be how to set your tension and kind of adjust your tension to have that beautiful stitch quality on the material you're using. And then the final step is going to be all the do's and don'ts with industrial thread to make sure that you have the most success sewing with industrial thread. Okay, so now let's start with winding our bobbin. The first thing you want to do is make sure that if you're using a bigger cone with a bigger hole on the bottom, such as this Filtech Tech 70 thread we're using, we're going to use an anti-vibration cone. That anti-vibration cone is going to allow your thread to not wiggle around like this. See how it sits on there nice and snug, and that's important because your cone oftentimes likes to move around. And the next thing we're going to be using is a thread sock, or a spool net, I guess they're called. So what you're going to do is you're going to just put your hand through it like this, and then I like to grab my thread and then kind of just throw this over the top and then pull my thread out the top just like that. And then I'm going to use all that excess to go in the bottom of this thread net and then just push that down on the spool stand. That is going to allow my thread to not just come unraveled and just make a big bird nest, you know? Because we don't want no bird nest. And that's oftentimes, that happens with this industrial thread because it's a lot more like tense and it just wants to kind of just like unravel. So we're gonna go ahead and use all those steps to give us the most success with this industrial thread. And then we're just gonna go around this thread guide just up here like this from back to front, just like our normal threading method. And then we're gonna come over here to our tension disc. We're gonna go from back to front through that little hole, and then we're wrapping from right to left around that tension disc. And that will give us a good tension. Then we're going to grab our nice little bobbin and we're going to go through that top slot going from the bottom out the top just like that. And then we're going to go ahead and put that on our bobbin winder over here, making sure that it kind of clicks down into that groove just like so. Then we're going to pull this thread nice and high and we're going to go ahead and hit that gas pedal. And if you're not using this thread net, you can always just hold this thread here to allow you to have a little bit more tension, because another reason we like to use this is it gives us a little more tension on our bobbin. So you can see as we're pulling, this thread staying nice and tight versus just coming off nice and easy. So you can either hold this even with the thread net, or if you have the thread net, it gives you enough tension where you can probably not hold on there. But I like to hold this anyways because it gives me more tension on my bobbin, allowing me to have a nicer bobbin that's going to be nice and tight and not squishy. And that's really important when we're talking about stitch quality on this industrial thread. Once we get it wound enough, we can go ahead and snip this thread just like so, and we can go ahead and wind the rest of the bobbin. Another thing you're going to notice is your bobbins are going to wind a lot faster with this industrial thread. I was barely hitting that gas pedal and my bobbin's already wound. So you can see, since it's thick thread, that it winds a lot faster. And one other thing you're going to do once you get it off is just squish it, make sure it's not squishy. You want it to be nice and tight, and that's how you know you have the perfect bobbin for beautiful stitch quality. So here we go. Now let's put this in the machine and start showing you how to thread the machine. Okay, so now we're going to be threading the machine. We're just going to pretty much be doing all the same steps as regular threading. We're going to keep that thread net on there. The spool anti-vibration cone is going to be on there as well. And then we're just going from back to front through this thread guide. And then we're going to be going through this thread guide where there's 3 holes. These 3 holes, it's crucial to go through all 3 coming from top to bottom. So typically you would miss the middle one, but this is really the only step that's different. We're going to be going through all 3 of them now. So now we're going to go ahead and go from top down from the left side around that disc. Then we're going from right to left around this disc. And then we're going to go catch that little spring, that take-up spring just right there. Underneath this little thread guide, into that thread guide, into that take-up lever, back through this thread guide, back through this thread guide here, and then we're going to go around that last thread guide right back there. So now that we're ready to thread that needle, it's important to highlight what type of needle we should be using. When using a Tech 70, we recommend an 18 or an 16 size needle. Depending on what material you use is dependent on what needle you should use. If you're using jeans and denim, use a jeans and denim 110 by 18 or a 100 by 16. If you're using leather, then maybe you should be using a leather needle. And the list goes on. There's all different types of needles. If you're interested in learning more about those needles, there's going to be a link in the description, and I'll also throw up an info card in the top right corner of this screen. You can check out that video and understand what needles you should be using with what materials. So now that we have that covered, 110 by 18 or 100 by 16 should be for your heavier Tech 70 threads. And then if you're using a lighter industrial thread such as a Tech 45, you could probably get away with a 9014 to 116. So now let's thread the needle. Since we're using an industrial thread, we can't be using that needle threader that the Juki TL comes with. We're going to have to hand thread this needle. Because that needle threader is very, very small, the industrial thread will be too thick and it won't work. Sometimes it will, but most of the time it won't, and you might mess up your needle threader. So if you have questions on that needle threader, we'll also put an info card up here on the Juki TL needle threader, how to fix it and how to use it. But we're going to be going from left to right, threading that needle by our hand. And since this thread is a lot stiffer and a lot stronger than our quilting thread, it's a lot easier to thread. So there you go. Make sure it goes back around that thread guide. There. Now we're going to lift up that foot, bring that thread underneath it, and just tuck it around the back and put that foot back down. So when using industrial thread, more than likely you're sewing over thicker materials. So we, of course, have our thick throat plate on in this machine. What is a thick throat plate? The throat plate literally just has a bigger needle hole in it, allowing your needle to flex and move when hitting those thicker materials and using that thicker thread so you don't break as many needles. So if you're using a regular stitch plate and you break a needle, you know that it's time to upgrade to that thick throat plate. And if you haven't broke a needle, don't break a needle. Upgrade to that thick throat plate now before it's too late. Link in the description for those parts. Of course, any part and accessory we go over in this video will of course be linked in the description below. We are the owners of JukiJunkies.com, where we sell tons of genuine Juki authentic parts, and we ship out very, very quick. So test out that quick shipping and click a link in the description to check out any of the parts we're going to be using. Today we're also going to be using a smooth foot. Since we're sewing over a vinyl material or leather material, it's very, I would say, just like sticky with metal. So it's important to have something that is a little bit more smooth. If you're using a material that's like an alligator skin or something that's sticky but also very bumpy, check out the roller foot. The roller foot is another great option when sewing over sticky but bumpier materials. So now that we know what stitch plate we're using, what needle we're using, and what foot we're using, let's insert this bobbin into the bobbin case and let's get started on sewing. So inserting the bobbin into the bobbin case is just like a standard bobbin or standard thread. You're just going to make sure that tail's falling down on that right side, inserting it into that little slot, and then going into that groove. The only difference is we're going to want to make sure that tension is set properly. Since we probably had our tension last set on a quilting thread, it's probably going to be a lot tighter because we're putting in a thicker thread now. So quite honestly, most of the time the tension is close, but you might need to tighten it up a little bit more. Since we're using a heavier thread, you're going to want a little bit more tension. So what we like to do is just go ahead and tighten that up with a T-screw. It's that recessed screw right there. And you're just going to turn that to the right about a quarter or half a turn, kind of depending on what you're looking for. And you kind of want to be able to pick up your bobbin case and your bobbin. And then when you hold it in place, you can kind of feel it's a little bit heavier than usual. Since this is an industrial thread, we want a lot of tension to help pull that thread down, giving you a beautiful stitch. We recommend getting an extra bobbin case and you label it with like maybe a little I for industrial thread, so that way you don't have to switch your tension back and forth between quilting and industrial thread. So now that we have that tension nice and tight where I can pull up my bobbin case, but if I hold it like this, I can kind of feel a good amount of tension, and it doesn't need to be like yanking on it, but just a little bit. I guess you could also do the drop test where you pick it up and you kind of just drop it like that, and if it feels like it dropped a little bit of thread, that's typically right where I want it. We're going to go ahead and test that out. We're going to snip about 2 inches off, so we have about a 2-inch tail. We're going to go ahead and insert that into our bobbin case area or our hook area. I usually make sure that U's facing up and I don't use this trap door. I like to insert it with that door closed so I can hear that audible click. So we're going to go ahead and open this bad boy up. Whenever I'm putting a new bobbin into my TL, I like to examine this little area right here where the metal piece is going around that bobbin case or that hook. Where you can see kind of like that hook right there. That hook right here is rotating around that basket where your bobbin case sits inside. And that little ledge right there, it's important that there's oil there every single time you go to sew. If it's very dry, that's not good. So every full bobbin change, we recommend 1 drop of oil right there on that ledge. So I'm gonna be using my needle tip oiling pen and dropping 1 little drop of oil right there on that ledge. Metal on metal always means you need some oil. So that hook area is important to make sure there's oil. And if this is not well lubricated, it can cause a lot of issues. So now that we know our hook is well lubricated, I'm going to go ahead and put that bobbin case in there, and I'm going to be listening for that audible click, making sure that little tail is right there on the edge. Listen for that click. Boom. Now we know it's properly inserted and we're ready to start sewing. So now that we have everything ready to sew, our next step is our pressure for pressure. Depending on what thickness of material we're sewing over some faux vinyl or faux leather, just 2 layers. We're going to release that pressure foot pressure. So we're going to probably go all the way up to just neutral pressure foot pressure. It may be a little bit more. So probably like the first, or actually we'll go down to like the little second hash mark right there. And that'll give us probably the perfect amount of pressure foot pressure for this. We're going to go ahead and put our foot down, and now it's time to adjust our top tension. We'll just go from our quilting tension, which was like 1.5, 2, and we're just going to turn that like 1 full rotation, and that should be plenty. There's no exact number because everybody's tension is going to be a little different on their machine. So really we'll get that exact number once we get this little sample sewn out. So we'll do our first little test sew, just like that. And you'll also be able to tell, depending on what material you're using, if you need to increase or decrease your pressure based on how your fabric's reacting. If your machine's sewing in the same spot, you probably need to decrease it. If your material's bunching up and curling up like this, you probably need to decrease it. And if you're already at that neutral level where you can't decrease it anymore, if you have the Juki TL, you can use that micro lifter to lift up your foot even more, going into a negative foot pressure, allowing you to sew at an even better tension as far as your pressure foot pressure goes. So we're going to go ahead and finish out this stitch. And remember, since we can't cut our thread, we're just going to do needle up with the needle up button right here. And then we're going to go ahead and lift up this foot, pull our material over here, and go ahead and snip that top and that bottom. So you can see the tension actually looks really good with minor adjustments. And if your tension doesn't look like this, we're going to make some adjustments. We have a full video going over tension and adjusting your tension. I'm going to put a link with an info card in the top right corner. Check out that video if you need some help with your tension. So if you don't want to watch this tension video that I linked in the info card in the top right corner, I'll go over the tension real brief right now. So what I'm pretty much saying is your bobbin case tension will control what your top stitch looks like. So when I'm sewing like this, that top stitch is actually your bobbin case tension. If it looks like a line, you need to increase that tension. So tighten it to the right about a half turn and then check your tension again. If your bottom doesn't look good and there's looping or there's a line, you need to increase your upper tension. When increasing your upper tension, you must make sure your foot is not up but down. The reason being is when you lift up that foot, your tension discs actually are separated. You see how it actually separates like that? When my foot's up, my tension discs are separated and that means there's no tension in those discs. When I put it down, it closes, and that's when the tension's accurate. So make all adjustments when that foot's down. That's oftentimes why people like to thread their machine with their foot up, because it's easier to get that thread through those tension discs. unless you're flossing your thread through and holding this top thread, it's hard to get it through there with your foot down. So make sure you make that adjustment with your foot down. So enough talking, let's just show you how beautiful the stitch quality is on a Juki TL with industrial thread. One thing I want to note is when you're sewing with industrial thread, it's crucial to also increase your stitch length. That is a very important step to getting beautiful stitch quality. Thick thread, industrial thread, does not like running on a very small stitch length. I like to run it at a 5 to a 6 to achieve that beautiful stitch quality. Oh, I just used my thread cutter. Oh no, you're not supposed to do that, but it's okay if you do once or twice. It'll still cut it, but you'll hear that it doesn't like cutting it. It'll dull out that thread cutter really quick. But as you can see, that longer stitch really pops because it gives you those dinosaur humps that you're looking for in your stitches, and it'll give you a very beautiful top stitch when you're sewing with, you know, thick bags and making a top stitch on your projects. So in conclusion, we've learned a lot. When using industrial thread, you don't want to use your thread cutter because it's going to dull out. I know that it's very, very easy to use that thread cutter because we've built in such a habit with that super easy heel click. So if it's too easy for you to do and you can't remember to not do it when you're using industrial thread, pick up a foot switch stopper. We'll put a link in the description. That'll disable the thread cutting function on your foot pedal and make it less tempting because it won't allow you to do it. So just make sure you have that scissor to snip that thread when you're done. Don't use that automatic thread needle threader. And if that's something hard for you to remember, pick up an extra needle threader because I know that it's going to bend out of place. So it's nice to have one on hand. So when you go back to using regular thread, it's easy for you to switch it out and you'll have a working needle threader. And then, of course, another really important factor is you're going to want to make sure that stitch length is long. 5 to 6 is important when using the Tech 70 because short thread length or stitch length just doesn't look good with industrial thread. So make sure you use that long stitch length. So now that we've kind of gone over all the things one more time, drop some comments down below what you learned from this video or what helped you or what questions you might even have. And if you enjoyed this video, share it with a friend that has a Juki TL. And if you don't have a Juki TL, get one. It's an awesome machine to have. It does everything from very fine sewing all the way up to heavyweight sewing or heavier duty sewing. And it's just very versatile and it's seriously one of our favorites. So if you enjoyed this video, like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you next Sunday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thanks for watching.